On Asia Down Under today, 2 stories of lending a hand. Hip-hop dancing for the youth of Cambodia, raising funds for the Japanese earthquake, and our final Music Month report, a marriage of musical harmony. Kia ora and welcome to Asia Down Under. This week marks the 50th anniversary of Amnesty International. The global human rights group has millions of followers all over the world and here in New Zealand. Here's Jasmine Miye with a report on this important organisation and their big anniversary.
Protecting human rights, I think, is huge because it doesn't affect just today and the society that we live in or, other societies, but it affects the future generations.
Not enough people actually believe that they can, from the comfort of their own front room, actually make a difference. And they can, and we know they can, we can prove they can.
We are successful. It is curious considering what a basic organisation we are. Just a bunch of people writing letters.
They say if a butterfly flaps its wings on the other side of the world, it affects us. We're all one big human family on this planet.
For 50 years, members of global human rights group Amnesty International, who now number some 3 million people, have been outraged by human rights offences taking place around the world every day. They've taken their outrage and turned it into very quiet, persistent action, politely but determinedly campaigning for change on behalf of those affected by what they deem to be serious injustice. They're hard at work throughout Asia, campaigning for many thousands of political prisoners across the region, working to end the death penalty in China, fighting to improve industrial rights in India, and much, much more.
Well, Amnesty is a membership organisation, so we're only as strong as our membership. So, what we do, we rely on ordinary people to join us, and they can do things like they would write to their local member of parliament, write to ministers, write to the Prime Minister. But I guess where we've seen the greatest impact of ordinary people joining us and doing things would be with prisoners of conscience, people imprisoned for just expressing their political beliefs. Now, we've got lots of examples where ordinary people have written to prison commandants and commanders who are imprisoning people, and we know, because prisoners have told us when they've been released, that their conditions have improved significantly.
The organisation is based on a simple concept. Individuals from around the world writing letters, applying pressure to foreign authorities to end despotic practices or release those imprisoned simply for their beliefs. It started in London in 1961 with an English barrister appalled to read in the newspaper that 2 Portuguese students had been imprisoned by their country's military dictatorship. Their crime? Raising their glasses in a toast to freedom and democracy. Peter Benenson's letter to the Observer newspaper was a reasoned plea for their release, and it led the way for millions of others to put pen to paper. In New Zealand, 13,000 Amnesty members still do this on a regular basis. Some of the first to get started decades ago were members of Auckland's Remuera group.
We fire off our letters primarily. That's our main campaigning tool, is letters and emails. It always has been. And it's very much a black hole. We don't get an awful lot back from Colonel Gaddafi. We think we're chipping away and getting nowhere, but suddenly things do happen. And our prisoners of conscience, on whose behalf we write letters, do get released. And we've had letters back from them saying how grateful they were and that they were aware that people out there were campaigning on their behalf, although they were locked up for sometimes long periods of imprisonment. And then they're released. So we attribute that to our campaigning.
One of the group's founding members, now 87, agrees. He's too old to attend meetings, but the fire still burns brightly.
Something like 40,000 prisoners of conscience, as we call them, have been released after the authorities concerned have received letters from individuals like myself.
Asian countries across the continent continue to condone human rights abuses at rates this organisation believes are far too high. And Myanmar is just one of the countries high on Amnesty's campaign list. One of those whose case was championed by Amnesty supporters here in New Zealand is Nanko Ko. Jailed for non-violent protest against the country's military regime and imprisoned for 7 years. He was eventually released and made it to New Zealand as a refugee. Last year, Amnesty in New Zealand awarded him its highest honour.
Personally, it's very humble, and also I thought that this is very responsibility to do for the future action on human rights and democracy in Burma and also some countries around Asia Pacific.
So he was imprisoned in the infamous insane prison in Burma, and that this is a very brutal regime. And he had to go through some terrible conditions there, and they have something there called solitary confinement, but they call it the dog box. So because he was not prepared to keep quiet when he was imprisoned, he was often in the dog box. And while in solitary confinement, he taught himself to read and write English from snippets of newspapers. So they used to call him the dog who could read. So it's a terrible story, but one of the human spirit triumphing over terrible circumstances. And he's now, you couldn't wish to meet a more dignified and proud Burmese person. He's working tirelessly for his own people.
That Burma is a prison state. Without your help, we cannot release. Without Amnesty and without the people who love the democracy and human rights, we cannot get the success. So please do use your liberty to liberate us. Thank you.
5 decades after it first began as a simple letter-writing organisation of volunteers, Amnesty today has widened its remit, tackling wider human rights issues like poverty, abuse against women and environmental change. They're savvy users of today's technology and have a long history of working with rock stars and celebrities to publicise their cause. Here in New Zealand, Lisa Ho is employed as a full-time fundraising coordinator for Amnesty. She's a first-generation New Zealander whose mother fled the genocide of Cambodia's Khmer Rouge.
I have, first-hand, experiences encounter with the devastation that it can have on, not just individuals, but also on the nation and also on the generations afterwards.
This year, Amnesty set up shop at Auckland's well-attended Pacifica Festival.
And we're here to campaign to stop violence against women in the Pacific. There is a Pacific Island Forum that's coming up in September, and all the Pacific Island leaders are meeting in Auckland. Our target is to gather 20,000 signatures to present to these leaders and hold them accountable.
Collecting signatures could seem pointless, but Amnesty believes otherwise.
One signature might not do a lot, 10 signatures might not do a lot, but when you have 20,000 signatures, I don't think, political leaders can ignore that, because that's 20,000 voices collectively speaking out in unity about a particular issue.
Amnesty figures show that domestic and sexual violence against women in many Pacific Island countries affects as much as 70% of the female population. It's human rights abuse on a grand scale, right on our doorstep. But Lisa's desire to work for change doesn't end with Amnesty. She's forging a link between a dance studio in New Zealand and another in Cambodia. Corazon Miller reports.